Alright, so the topic of this shi'ur is on the topic of the Harchakot, as they're known, of a Niddah, what a Niddah cannot do with their husband, or indeed any man, but specifically their husband when they are in that period. Now, there's a lot to say on this topic. Now, you know that in the general Orthodox mainstream world, there are really a lot of restrictions, and many communities, of course, they won't even pass things to each other, let alone touch in any way, shape, or form during this period. And we're going to look into what is the source of that and whether it is correct and right and good. Now, if we look in the actual Gemara, if you look in the actual Gemara on for Ketuvot Daf for example, so it says, "Ba'amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Hanina Amar Rav Huna Kol Malachot she'isa asal ba'ala Nida asal ba'ala." All the work that a wife generally does for her husband, and Nida does for her husband. Chutz v'mizigat hakos matzat hamiktah Harchatat panav yadav reglav. Besides for pouring him a cup, means pouring wine, and giving it to him, and making the bed, and washing his hands, face, and feet. The reason why is because back in those days, this was considered Iba. It was considered as a very personal, intimate types of things. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what the Gemara is. That's the Halakha of the Gemara. Okay, so you only have to not do those things. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm a bit out of it. Okay. Alright, so now what we're going to discuss is if this is the Gemara tells us what you're not allowed to do between a man and a wife during Niddah, so where do all these other things come from? So we have the general approach of our sages was to push away extra stringencies, to make Niddah as minimalistic as possible. So as a general point on Niddah, we're going to see that you know it's apparent from the Torah that in comparison to other menstruation practices of other surrounding nations, in the context of when the Torah was given. So the Torah is very unrestricted. There's very few restrictions on a woman, and it's possible to say. So if we're doing much less than all the other nations, in other words, we're much more so-called lenient in regards to separation from a wife while they're menstruating, well then you might ask, so why do we care at all that she's a Niddah? If we make it so much less than all the other nations, and if we care so little, why is it, or if we restrict this the very backwards and primitive menstruation practices. For example, we don't require women to go out and live in a separate hut while they're menstruating, like many do. Many nations still do nowadays, all over the world. Well, then why is it that if you are there and you have relations with a Niddah, you are chayav karet, which is a very serious punishment. Sorry. So, we have to ask. So, basically, and that's why. Why does the Torah keep it at all? So there are a few different reasons to give, but I think that the most compelling answers because it gives a woman rights in marriage. Like back in the day, women didn't have very many rights at all, and when they would be menstruating, and they wouldn't want to have relations, but the husband might, and he might force her. So by making this prohibition, right, at a time when women generally, as a general rule, are not interested in having relations, then there won't be this. It protects her rights from the husband, which would be very, very important back in the original context when the Torah was given. So that I think is like a very compelling reason for why we have a law niddah. But nonetheless, the general rule is that the Chachamim are very permissive. They don't give a whole bunch of stringencies. So this halakha, right. So we have to understand all these the few restrictions that are needed. We have to understand on the basis of that there's a general trend against making all these separations between a man and wife just because she is an niddah. That's the general trend. So this halakha of mezigat hakos and haftarat mitah and ruchetzet lo panav yado reglav. By the way, if I didn't translate it, it means yeah, pouring the cup of wine for him, so that it's making the bed and washing his face, hands, and feet. So this is not actually in the Talmud Yerushalmi. But nonetheless, we do have in the Sefer Chilukim, Chilukim Shebein Anshe Mizrach Bnei Eretz Yisrael. It's a book of differences between the customs and practices of Babylonian Jewry and Jewry in Eretz Yisrael. We find that there are a huge amount of differences. Because in Eretz Yisrael, they had all different types of separations, whereas in Bavel, they only had those three separations stated in Talmud Bavli. She would only not pour him a cup. She would only not wash his hands, feet, and face. She would only not make the bed, but they'd do everything else. In fact, it was so extreme. It was so extreme in Israel that they wouldn't let in Israel they wouldn't let women touch anything, not even the vessels of the house, and it's only because of the great necessity that they allow her, to nurse her babies. So these things are not actually like the halakha requires. So where do they come from? So the truth is they come from a very strange book called Braita de Masechet Niddah. Now this Braita de Masechet Niddah, it's not exactly clear where it came from, but Harav Shaul Lieberman believes that it came out of Eretz Yisrael, from a weird sect of Jews, not Karaite, but a weird little sect of Jews, something like the Esseni, some extreme sect, which believed in like this is extreme purity and impurity. So we only have in the Talmud Bavli, we're only told these three things. We're not told that they can't touch. We're not told that they can't sit on the same couch. We're not told, I heard, apparently someone showed me in a sefer that said that they shouldn't even play tennis together, a husband and wife, in the period, because he can feel the force of the ball that she hits, and ridiculous things like this. This is all not required by by the Halakha, by the Talmud Babli. Yeah. So besides for what the Jews in Israel were accustomed to, you have different people in different communities. They also did some of these like stranger things you don't have to, and some didn't. And this has become the subject of more and more academic interest. Incidentally, it has been much more researched and much more looked into than before. Now, this included. Yeah, so this included that. In fact, in Israel, they even put into the marriage documents, the ketubah, they put in that she had extra obligations when it came to Niddah. So we keep on finding these very extreme types of stringencies. So now we're going to we can speak about this for a long time. There's a lot of stuff to say, but I want to skip to a letter written by Harav Shirira Gaon, one of the greatest of the Gaonim, one of the last, one of the greatest, from which we have a lot of halachic works, and he writing a one book or letter called as Igeret Rav Shirira Gaon, the letter of Rav Shirira Gaon, which tells us about the authority of rabbinic law, tells us about the way it was passed down, how the oral law was written down, and so on. It's very important. So Rav Shirira Gaon is a very important individual, and you can know that if he tells you what the law is, then it's reliable. If this is what the law was in the times of the Talmud, and this is he's passing it down faithfully what the law was. So the Teshuvah says, and this Teshuvah, you can. I'll tell you what, when I post this is a YouTube video, so I'm going to put a link to a academic article that I used to find this, and it'll be there if anyone is interested in looking at it. So he says that which you ask, that the rabbi said, all the work that a woman does to her husband when she's in niddah, when she menstruates, she also does it for her husband, with the exception of pouring the cup and making the bed and washing his hands, face, and feet. This is, but in our place in Babel, we are stringent on ourselves not to touch Mishkav, Moshav, Shalinda. She won't touch the bed where she lies down or where she sits. Ella, she confesses rather he will even wash his clothing, and he'll purify himself, right? If he comes to go there. והיה מנהגנו בעשת טמא הנידה, אלו היה תחתיה מהכרים, היו מטמאים את כולם. And it was a custom that when she was impure, that even if she was on top of 100 pillows, we would make all them tameh. The Anna of she doesn't bake for us all the days of when she is in Niddah, until various students, various sages came up at this time. And they requested to change our custom in this. They said that regarding the lying down and the sitting of the niddah, to not separate from them. Right, and we're not accustomed to do this massive separation nowadays. And we don't even have, purity and impurity laws. So we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, we don't have a temple. So, like, if we were able to clear ourselves from all the other impurities, such as the impurity of the dead and other types of impurities, so then we would purify ourselves from them. Since it's impossible to purify ourselves from these other impurities, so why should we separate ourselves from the impurity of a Niddah, from where she sits or where she lays down? And they brought a reason for this. And the reason behind saying this, well, we're tameh anyway, so what difference does it make about these particular laws of tamah? So they said, can you be half pure? You can't be half pure. You're going to be pure. You can be impure. Now you can be a deeper level of impure, but you can't be half. And since it's impossible for us to purify ourselves from other impurities, so what's the reason that we should keep these things? Let Israel eat their bread while impure. We won't separate from the bed or the sitting places of a niddah. And this is exactly what the Talmud Bavli says already. Already the Talmud Bavli was aware of this, because already it was after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. They weren't able to purify themselves. So that's why the Talmud Bavli says, all the work that the woman does for her husband, and the three things that they prohibited is not because they're impure, but rather because they bring the man to being used to having relations. In other words, they're things which are related to relations with her, which is forbidden. So the Chachamim held them back from doing these three things in order to make a fence to the prohibition, as it says in the Mishnah. That a person who is a zav, he has a gonorrhea, he shouldn't sit with the Izavah, a woman who is impure because of unnatural emissions. He shouldn't be with her because it brings them close to Averah, because neither of them are permitted to have relations while they're in that impurity. So this is because of you're going to get used to doing Averah. But because of impurity, look, not because of impurity. But and furthermore, we say, Ravina says, Nida kosala hala, she even separates hala, ושלחו במציתה קדושה שנידה מותרת ללך לבית הכנסת. Yeah. And they also sent from the Mesivta, they sent from the Yeshiva sent out, in other words, they sent out a legal decision that that a woman is allowed to go to the synagogue to pray. Which, by the way, is a proof that in the times of the Gaonim, we're talking about the year 900, the 10th century, women were going to the Bet Knesset to pray. I'm just saying a side point. And she's allowed to wear the clothes of her husband. And her husband's allowed to wear her clothes. I don't know why they would, but it's permitted. But rather they should just be careful that there shouldn't be any blood on them from her niddah. And all of this is permitted. Why? Because we don't have purity and impurity laws nowadays. And thank God for that. Right? And anyone who separates from these things, it's only like heretical way of thinking. So, in other words, being so super strict is actually heretical. Yeah. And the elders or the wise, the community leaders, are obligated to protest against this. And when we saw that our congregation saw and they heard this, um, from the from the from their legal decisions and the different reasons. So the problem was when they heard that this is all you had to do, so they became very weak with when it came to Niddah laws, and they permitted them also entirely. And the rest stayed on their original custom. They didn't change, even though they knew that they were now told that the law is that they're allowed to touch and allowed to do all these things. They're only just not allowed to do those three things. She's not only not allowed to do those three things: the pouring cup and make the bed and washing his hands, face, and feet. So they didn't change. So some people were very weak, and some people didn't change, and that so they're asking the Rosh Hashanah to enlighten us and to tell us what the law is. Um, and basically, I'm going to say very, very shortly that essentially, Rav Shalira Gaon essentially says that you're right, but he had the problem that there's a non-halachic issue is that he felt that if we're going to tell people this, that they're all going to become weak and they're not going to keep Niddah at all. Because they're so used to these extra customs, and therefore, if you're going to be so used to the extra customs, you're not going to. The problem is if you're going to, give a foot, they're going to take a meter. They're not even keep. They're not. You're going to you give a centimeter, take a meter. They're not going to keep the laws at all. So he said, but you're right, but don't make a big deal out of it, because otherwise no one's going to keep it. So now we move on, and now we have the Teshuvah from Rambam. So when he arrived to Egypt from Spain through all his travels, he saw that it's a problem that needed fixing. When he came to Egypt, he saw the type of thing that was happening. And he writes, Aman Gadol Peshat Sipur, a great sin was spread amongst the majority of the congregation. But they became very weak immersing in the mikveh and in the counting of the 7 clean days. And they and they relied on a heretical or a non-legal custom to just wash in regular water. So they'd have a bath, a shower, or whatever, but they wouldn't go to the mikveh. And they thought that through this random washing, so she would become pure, and therefore she would become permitted to her husband. And even more problematic than this, that the majority of them, they rely on this complete heresy, complete non-legal nonsense, and that they rely on something that God didn't command them to do. They would take the menstruating woman, take a woman who wasn't menstruating, to spray on her pure waters, according to what they believe, זאת הפעולה, sorry, זאת הפעולה היא הנקראת אצלן al-sachav, היסיקה. So this action is called in the Arabic al-sachav, which means the spraying. ויש מהן הממתינות ביציקה הזאת, שתהיה בין השמשות, they will only do it at dusk, לפי אמונת המינים, according to the beliefs of the heretics. So there's those heretics who would do this thing, and they would do this in order to when they would. I mean, this disgusting custom, which joins together, and it both this sort of heresy. But minut doesn't exactly mean heresy. It means the rejection of the Jewish legal system for other systems, and gilui arayot, and forbidden relationships. And even if she goes and immerses in the waters of mikvah afterwards, nonetheless, this whole practice, what they do, this is a bad culture, and it's evil, and it's a great sin. She calls man shemachzikin b'minut. So any time that they do this spraying and they do this little bath or whatever, even if they go to the mikvah, they're going to not care about mikvah. And it's like, it doesn't make a difference. They both make me pure. So that's so Rambam, he came to Egypt, he spoke to it against it, and it didn't really help. So this is on the one hand. So we're going to get to this Harchakot in a minute, when Rambam speaks about Harchakot, because the same problem. So this sort of shower thing, when they spray the water and all that. So he didn't. So now we move on to the chumrot, which we were discussing before, which the halakha doesn't require, lack of separation from niddah. And we'll see why this part was relevant. Because Rambam understood that there is two parts to this problem. There's the problem that they were accepting these heretical ways of making a person pure, which according to Jewish law don't make them pure. And at the same time, he also realized that they're also accepting these non-Jewish and non-legal separations between a man and a wife while she's in niddah. So he says in Teshuvah, and this is mostly translated from the Arabic. The Teshuvah is found in Shef Rambam in the Blau edition, Chelek Aleph, Siman Kuf Yud Daled. And also, if you look in Otzar Geonim, Chelek Het, the Teshuvot, Siman Taf Samech, which is on page 184 to 185. Okay. So I'm gonna ask the question, and we're asking for a legal ruling. What is your opinion on the Rambam? What is your opinion on the matter which the women have been accustomed to do, and in every place that we've heard about, that the woman she distances herself from the time of her menstruation period starts, or from when she's given birth, which has similar laws. She doesn't drink, and she doesn't touch food or drink or other vessels and clothes in which she's not personally using. In other words, she won't touch them if her husband or anyone else is going to touch them until she goes out of her menstruation period and she becomes pure in by washing and now that these different students, these various sages, just like in the times of shi'ur gone again, and this time the people who actually learn the law, they start questioning all this. They question this custom, and they say, since you are obligated to immerse after 7 clean days, this is the most important thing. So you shouldn't watch. You don't have to worry about anything else. But you are allowed to deal with it, touch the food and the drink. You're allowed to do all the work in the house. You're allowed to do whatever you want during this period. And they are relying on the words of the sages that say that you can do. You only can't set the bed and pour wine for him, pour the cup, pour wine for him, for a husband. So what does His Honor, Rambam, say about the thing that the Geonim have enacted? Well, the assumption is that some of the Geonim may have enacted it. It could be that some Geonim enacted it, but the fact is it's still not the Bavli law. In fact, Sharia Gaon doesn't say it's a valid enactment of the Geonim, and so if he doesn't say it's a valid enactment, then it's pretty much not. You had a lot of Geonim who were not really very valid throughout the day, because a lot of it was a political appointments on occasion. So you have to be aware of this. So you ask him, so should the woman keep this custom of like not touching anything and being all these stringencies, or should they not? And many have relied on you, Your Holiness, it actually says, who is accustomed in his own house with the women. In other words, they knew what he was doing in his own house, didn't have all this chorot. So you should let us know what you should be accustomed. That's the question. So they asked, should we keep all these extra stringencies, or we should follow what these sages have told us that no, the correct law is, as the Bavli says, they should only not do those 3 things that the Kohen said, but they can do everything else. So Rambam gives a very short answer. What these students of Halakha said, they're correct, and according to it we rule. Someone who doesn't want to change his custom and they want to keep all these extra stringencies, we're not going to force him not to. He can keep it. So the next Teshuvah seems to be in relation to a sort of criticism that came to Rambam after his first Teshuvah, his first response, which we just discussed. So he mentions, and what like this person who asked him a question, in this case it was Yosef ben Jabbar from Baghdad really, who wrote him a question, and he answers like this: what you mentioned from that which they have, put me down, made fun of me, that I permitted a niddah in 7 clean days, which he didn't. That she can sit inside her house. If the intention is if they're talking about, baking and cooking and all the other things that niddah can do in the house, besides those three things that the Chachamim said that they shouldn't. This is permitted even in the day of, even when she's a full Niddah, let alone the 7 clean days. Because the matter of pure and impure is separate from forbidden and permitted. Here, let me stress this point. Rambam is saying, and he's correct, that pure and impure has nothing got to do with prohibited and permitted. You are not prohibited, per se, from being impure. You're prohibited from doing certain things while impure. Now, in this case, of course, we're all impure anyway. So there's no real laws of Tumah and Tahara. They're mostly relevant to a Bet HaMikdash, to a temple, which we don't have. Right? This is our custom that is spread in all of our lands and also in all of France. This is the law of the Talmud. I don't think, by the way, when he says France, I think he means Provence. And we found this amongst the people of Israel. Then at the time we were amongst them, because Rambam wasn't Israel for a while. So we find that Rambam says that by the time of Rambam, so a lot of the extra stringencies have been dropped. A lot of the extra stringencies have been dropped, and we find that all these people were not keeping them. But in Egypt we found these the communities, they were following the ways of these heretics who don't keep the Jewish law, don't accept the Jewish law. And they copy the Karaite women of the Karaite Jews, not the rabbinic Jews. If your minhag is like, your custom is like the people, the custom of the people of your land is like the people of Egypt. In other words, that they do all these extra stringencies which you don't have to. We're not going to tell them to get rid of it. So, because they're just like accepting extra, it's their choice if they want to make their lives hard by accepting these extra things. Is on condition that they keep the 7 clean days, and they will probably go to mikveh as halakha requires. But if that's your minhag as well, so if it's your custom that they don't go to the proper mikveh, they don't, then this is completely this is heresy, and it's not a custom. So if you're accustomed to do extra stuff, then fine, go ahead and do extra stuff. But if you do things which has been off the Gemara, then you shouldn't do that. להכריח את האנשים על הדין, and all I have to do is just force people, the Talmud says, the Gemara says, and nothing else. And we told them that touching clothing and food is permitted. So you can keep your custom, and whoever wants to be more permissive and only follow what the Talmud says, then they can. Okay, but if he just doesn't want to touch the food and drink, that he thinks it's dirty, or because of extra fence to stay away from the isurim that that apply to a shwaying movement, okay, that's fine. But if he's doing it because he thinks that it's actually forbidden, it's legally forbidden, halakha asur, so then it's like he's a kofar. It's like he's a heretic and he's denying the law of Quran. Yeah. Now, I could go further, but I'd rather just sum up. And there's also another important teshuvah too, from the son of Rambam, then Rambam, but we'll finish off on this. A lot of the customs nowadays, now we get to how people behave nowadays. A lot of these nowadays, they come from different poskim. And certain poskim, such as Ramban, Nachmanides, were heavily influenced by these practices. But I thought the Niddah that we mentioned before, that is was a book written by some sect, according to Harchakot, which is all these different things: don't touch, don't do this, don't do that, and so on and so forth. These are Jewish law. It's not in Talmud. It's not mentioned in Jewish law. So, if you want to be strict, that's your prerogative. But if you're following this, and you're with a girlfriend or a wife or someone who is in Niddah, there's another person in the picture. You have to remember the law is more for her protection than it is for men. So men go all crazy stringent and try to take it down on her. They've got it all wrong. Man is obligated, not because it's his mitzvah, it's his obligation not to do to women. He's obligated because it's her, it's for her protection, for her own good, in my opinion. And as such, if it is not something that is forbidden by halakha, then it's permitted. Now, the halakha forbade three things with the niddah: that she can't pour in wine, can't wash his hands, face, and feet, and cannot make his bed, because these were considered to be intimate things. Now, we know in general, with all the arayot, all the forbidden relations, which includes the niddah, so you're not allowed to do khiba, you're not allowed to touch or act in a way which is considered sexually, well, intimate. We'll just say just intimate, full stop. So you can't have like a long hug, which is a very intimate. You can't kiss or things like that. But you can do things which are not intimate. You can kiss on the cheek, you can shake hands, just like you can do with any regular woman, even if she's married. Even if she's a Jewish married woman who is one of the arayot, it's definitely, you had relations with her. Nonetheless, you're allowed to do all these things. The same thing with a woman who is an Niddah. That's halakha. You are allowed to do these things. You're not allowed to do things which are intimate. Now, we shouldn't punish women, and we shouldn't hold them to things which are not part of the law. As I said at the very beginning, Jewish law consistently is restricting ancient, primitive menstruation practices. It's not. It's required that you keep whatever halakha requires you to keep, but it's still a restriction on the way that it was done, in various parts of the world. They still do in various parts of the world, such as in Ethiopia and in Nepal and other places where they have these extreme menstruation practices. So it's very important to keep this into account. It is not prohibited to hold our hand or hug or pass things or things like that. There's no prohibition to touch. Touching is one which is of an intimate nature and something that would cause intimate things. So this is a very broad introduction to Halakha. Without going into further sources, but basically, the main point is that not only does the Talmud explicitly say the requirements, but then you also have the Geonim, as stated by Shira Gaon and Rambam. The only thing is that they warn that you should be careful if it's going to cause someone to be weak in general, but you don't have to keep it, and you can't force anyone to keep these. It's something that should be decided between any couple together, specifically giving weight to the woman's point of view because it's for her sake, and therefore I think that this is the very key point that's to be made. If there's any questions, you can turn on your microphones, ask any questions. Anyone? Let me just turn on your microphone because you want to. Any questions, anyone?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all,
You're welcome. Okay, so as while I feel there's a few different points that have to be dealt with. So the first point is you said by society it means what religious Orthodox women that or general society, but When we talk about derech hiba, or whenever it says derech anything, derech eretz or whatever, it's talking about general society. There's nothing that implies that it's specifically religious or observant people. So when we say it's the derech hiba, it means in the place where you are. So for example, if in the place where you are, it's acceptable to kiss someone on the cheek, then it's acceptable. If it's not acceptable, if that's considered chima, then it's chima. So therefore, it goes by where you are. It's actually irrelevant about what the Jews in the place think. It's what general society thinks. If it's majority Jews, then it's what the Jews think. Whoever thinks. And the same thing goes for tzniut in general. If you're in the middle of the city in Oman, for example, you'd better be wearing long pants because in the business districts, that's what everyone wears, you know. But if you're in an area near the beach or whatever, people wear shorts, then you can wear shorts. But that's just a general point on that. Derech Hibab, yes, it's societally relevant. Now the question is, when it comes to a nidah and chibam between a man and a wife. So this is a bit of a difficult point. The point is, we know that the Chachamim say specifically, do not do these three things of pouring a cup of wine and making up their hands, feet, and then face, because these were considered chibah. These was considered to be intimate. Now, if you noticed, I don't know if you noticed, when I was reading one of the Teshuvot of Harambam, and when I was reading the question, it actually listed making the bed and pouring the wine, but it didn't actually say washing the hands, feet, and face. And it was pointed out by certain academics, probably because by that time it wasn't considered intimate, so they just didn't even discuss it. But or it just wasn't done. Either way, he washed it himself. But the question is it those three specific things, or is it anything which brings to chipah? So I actually was very uncertain about this. So my feeling is that it is those three things plus any general prohibition with any one of the prohibited relationships, with the exception of yichud. Because we know that yichud is specifically allowed for a husband and wife who's a niddah, even though it's not allowed by other arayot, or chibam. There's no explicit exception that allows chibam while she's a niddah. So, therefore, it would follow, seemingly, in my humble opinion, that any type of side chibah is prohibited. But by chibah, I mean touching. Or anything that will bring you towards intimacy, which is unnecessary. But for example, this doesn't prohibit even sleeping in the same bed, while she's an adult. It's not automatically prohibited. It depends on if that is intimacy for you. For a lot of people, it's not intimate necessarily. You can just do it every night. So even things like that. So it really, really depends on. Chacham enough that are sure a wise person's eyes are in his head, you can foresee the outcome. But the general trend has to be not to be more strict than this, but to be as minimally strict as possible. Remembering, of course, that the whole Torah, in the first place, the very few restrictions that we have in Chumash are much, much less than restrictions that other nations have at the time, therefore telling us that it's something that's to generally be restricted, and it's as well as that our sages, because I'll generally try to restrict as well. Okay, is that all? Or is there anything else? Okay. Well, there's actually a few questions to this, and I'll start with the first one. First point being, like, there's been a lot of people since Rambam. The point over here isn't about Rambam. I mean, I didn't actually mention it. Like I mentioned that there was more, but I didn't go into them. Is that there's Teshuvot from Rambam's son, where people were essentially writing here to him about his father and about him, about the practice in his home. If you knew they were only keeping the three things. They only kept the three things. Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam, right? He only kept the three. They only kept the three things inside the home that Chazal said you're not allowed to do when she's not allowed to do while she's a niddah or a husband. So he answered whatever he answered. It's not particularly relevant. Now, what we have to understand that from the very beginning there was big fights over this. There were very big fights. The community wanted it, and the rabbis who knew where it truly came from, it's Karaedic or it's paganistic sources, or it's the source from Yim, from people who don't really follow Halakha, different Jewish sects and cults and so on. Then they opposed it. Now, what happened was that in Spain, others who saw this stuff, they saw Berata, whatever it's called exactly. 1 second. They saw Berata Hilchot Niddah and all these other things, these weird things. So they didn't know that it wasn't halakha. They didn't know it wasn't law. So the whole fight between the general trend amongst the simpletons of the time was to have these weird beliefs about menstruation, which continue to this day in many places. The rabbis didn't have the ammunition always because they saw these books and said, hey, this is a source. The Shulchan Aruch is relatively lenient, in comparison to a lot of practice nowadays. Much more lenient than a lot of Ashkenazim, or Hasidim, and so on. If you just look in books of Tahara, of Dinei Tahara, Chabad and others, it's really, really quite strict, and much more strict than what even people who follow Shulchan Aruch do. The point over here, for example, in this shi'ur, is not about what people should follow, people do follow. The point is, what do people have to follow? The question, we're not questioning that people came after, Talmud and Rav Shira Gaon and Rambam and Rabbi Avraham ben Rambam and so on and so forth. There were plenty who came after, and great people. But the question is over here, especially nowadays, when people have to be when people should be empowered to keep the law, to make it easier for them to keep the law. If they want to keep the law, they should be made easier and harder. What are they obligated to do? That's the question. What are you obligated to do? And the truth is, now more than ever, I think it's not anyone else's business what people do in their own home, and people wouldn't even know. People wouldn't even know. Back in the old days, they would know if someone was in niddah. It's still that nowadays. If they consider it a halakha, that no one should know that he's in niddah, it's a halakha, but whatever. They think it's an inyan of sin, fine. So if that's the case, then it's even easier to keep all these things, and so forth. So my general response to all these points about what the community does nowadays, to me, it's not particularly relevant. You get to a point where you just don't really care anymore. You just this is the law, and the rest is whatever people choose for themselves. But the only thing that I absolutely insist on is that one does not force their level on someone else, and it's especially relevant to niddah because there's two people involved, the man and the wife, and usually it's the man forcing something onto his wife, to his girlfriend or whatever, and he really, really should not do that. So that's basically my general response to this. But it's quite clear why historically there was these trends, and it's very easy to follow relatively. But mainly because it's not just a rabbinic trend, it's a trend amongst the average person. and how they view Niddah. Okay. All right. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ואמן. אוקיי, בהצלחה רבה.